This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Kelly Hale. And we're going to talk about the hidden connection between um, your brain, your body, and your belly. And we're going to also talk about your gut is talking, but are you listening? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to welcome you to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, thank you so much, Phantom. I am honored to be here and doing well. Thank you.
Every guest, we always ask a couple questions till we get to the heart of your story. And the couple questions are basically what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Sure. So I think I'll address the what motivates me on first a personal level and then the motivation of why I do what I do professionally. But they're so intertwined. So it is hard to separate them. But I think what motivates me is knowing that I have the ability to promote health with every action, every forkful, every choice I make in my daily life and how I set up my environment. And that is both personal and professional because I share that desire for others to feel that motivation as well. And professionally, oh my goodness, I am so incredibly grateful to love what I do. And I'm motivated to share it and help it reach more people because I'm here in Metro Detroit, in my little corner of the world. And I've had a wait list for many years for my one-to-one services. And I know that more people need this unique work. So I am very motivated to get out there and help people realize that everything they need to find the calm and to have ease, whether it's with digestion or brain health or body and feel strong and stable in their joints, everything that they need is within them via nervous system regulation.
It's good to pay it forward. I love talking to people who are, coaches or mentors or therapists. And, musicians are kind of therapists of the soul.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
so it's all in the same space. And so people always ask me, it's like, oh, why are you talking to so many people? Because, the human experience through conversation and talking, you can learn a lot from somebody like that's gone through something or has learned something and then figured out how to convey that. And that's
Mhm.
really cool because you've had 25 years in rehab and wellness. And so I'm going to get into like, what's your perspective on healing and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, so I'd love to talk about that, but I just want to acknowledge something you said, if I may. Musicians and music as therapy. I couldn't agree more. Music is so therapeutic. I talk with the people I serve about it. And I was just having a conversation with my 14-year-old the other day about music as therapy because I went to a lecture on raising teen daughters. That's a real sort of adventure and
I have a
extreme sport, if
25-year-old
you
old
will.
daughter myself. I have a 20. She's gotten past that. Now she's telling me that she knows more than me, and it's different than when she was 17.
Oh
It's
yeah.
a
Well,
25-year-old telling me more than that she knows, and she does.
I'm glad to see someone who's survived and is thriving through a teenage daughter. But we were talking about how I went to this lecture and Lisa Damore was talking about the music and the playlists that these kids create for emotion. And, some of them are their like make me cry playlist. And the parents are like, why are they creating playlists like this when they want to work through the feelings? And she said, no, it brings up the feelings. And what I would say is it even helps them to feel it more deeply so they can process it. So I just wanted to acknowledge the music and the creativity. I have huge admiration for musicians. I feel like everything that you do helps the world keep going and is definitely therapeutic. And so I got off on music and I want to make sure I honor your original question. Would you mind repeating that for me, please?
Well, it's like your perspective on healing. How has it evolved over time?
Oh, goodness. Yes. Yeah. I think having 25 years in rehab and wellness, and honestly, if I back up even more than that, because I started teaching movement and fitness in high school, and this is really going to date me, but back around, the days of aerobics, the dance school that I was at needed an aerobics teacher that one time didn't show up. They threw me in there and I was like, I love this, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I want to get trained in it. So I've seen a lot of evolution and, people would go to exercise and movement as part of their wellness to kind of forget things or to pound it out. And then when I went into the rehab side of things, people would go to it for a response, a reaction, for a recovery. But what
Mhm.
I love now, and I love being able to inspire and empower people to do, is let's be ahead of it. Let's understand what our nervous system needs. Because if you are stuck in fight, flight, freeze, and you're definitely more biased, and that's a survival mode, for example. And if we're in that more flight phase of fight, flight, freeze, maybe running isn't the best
That might not
activity
be the
for you.
best thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just kind of feeding into that. So what I love is that now in healing, nervous system regulation is more of a household word. It's not people, I used to bring it up and people would look at me like I had three heads. And so I
Mhm.
love that it is more in the forefront. And I also love that people are curious about it and they're willing to look at it. And so healing now, I mean, the wellness industry can get sort of a bad rap. It's expensive, it's very privileged, it's very entitled, and I see that and I have concerns about that. I mean, I come from a Pilates background and that is definitely a privileged area. But if we drop back to what we have innately within us, our nervous system, which really allowed us to come online with our motor skills and our cognitive skills from in utero to the first 3 years of life, and then still supports us beyond that, but it does get tripped up. But if we really go back to those basics, to what we have within, it's accessible to everyone. And that's why I'm such a nut about creating all these YouTube videos and weekly lives on the brain body biome inspo, because I want everyone to have access to it. So I think healing is shifting, that people are realizing they can work with what they have. They don't need the fancy equipment. And I
Mhm.
also think that there is a much, much better understanding, and I'm so grateful for this and I'm so here for it, a much better understanding of the true mind-body connection. Someone can say, well, I'm going to do some breathing exercises. But again, if they are agitated and a certain reflex, the Moro reflex, is tripped up, and they start breathing without having first integrated their nervous system, they're going to get more agitated.
Yeah.
So I think the science is catching up with that whole mind body piece and helping people to understand that it's a little bit more than just a few breathing exercises or a magic potion that put on your face or spray in your room.
Well, I think there's a lot of pillars because I've always kind of pointed that out when I'm dealing with like creative people, because sometimes they get stuck on just like it's all about the heart, right? It's all about the soul. But then like
Mm.
if your mindset's not there, right, and if you're not eating right,
Mhm.
you're not going to
Mhm.
perform. If you're a musician, you're going to go on tour for 6 months, but you're not eating right, right? You're like, and you're freaking out, and you're too much caffeine, and you're not sleeping. It's like you could sit there and practice for 6 hours,
Mhm.
but like
Mhm.
if you've got all these other problems, all these other pillars, like your mind, body, soul, heart, like you're gonna crash. You're gonna crash out, and you wonder why did you crash out, because you're not paying it. You can't just pay attention to one thing. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes we get these quick fixes because we have 10 steps for this, 15 minutes to that. Everybody wants to go 0 to 100 and then they're done. And what I've
Mhm.
always found is they have to have a sustainable process that you're not going to drop, that you can
Yeah.
integrate into your life, and it's not going to be a fad. You know,
Yes. Yes, Phantom, that's so well said and so important, because I work with a lot of creators, musicians, dancers, artists, and there is such a passion, but sometimes, and I consider myself a creative, not a musician. I mean, I love musicals and I've been a chorus girl. I don't have the vocals to be a lead, but I'm definitely there in awe of those that do. And the whole idea of having these different pillars that have to be attended to, because when we get hyper focused, which we often do as creatives, we can get imbalanced, and then the adrenals get depleted. And even as simple, not simple, but important, the structural component, the vocal cords, the respiratory diaphragm, all of those have to be supported for musicians that use their voice, or perhaps they're using their fingers and their arms to create incredible sound with instruments. So definitely thinking about that, and also the pillars, and it's hard to be consistent. I love that you use the word sustainable, because what is realistic? And I've had conversations with the people I've served through the years. And, as an early therapist and practitioner, I was wanting to give them the world. So I would give them a 45 to 60-minute home program that I like to call home play, because we don't want it to be like homework, but it wasn't realistic. And now I've learned through the years of serving many people that 3 exercises, maybe 5 at the most, that are 3 minutes or less, and then teaching them how to implement it, maybe 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, 1 before rehearsal, and 1 after rehearsal.
Yeah,
So
then it's
that
like
they're,
more likely you're gonna do it.
yeah, exactly. Maybe even coupling it or marrying it to something you're already doing. Like I do some of my nervous system exercises while I'm brushing my teeth, because I always brush my teeth, right? So I'm not
Mhm.
going to skip that. So however we can make it specific to their needs and honor their very full lifestyle.
Well, that's where yeah, I know you mentioned it in your questions you're ready to answer. Is like people are so short on time,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's kind of have they prioritize the right things they're for them. Like like are you doing it for somebody else, and then you're not able to do for yourself because you're like people pleaser or whatever.
Oh
Like
yeah.
sometimes people they say, well, my schedule's set, like they can't change it. But you
Mhm.
actually like you uncover that, you kind of push on it a little bit, and it could like you could change it because like what's the point? Like if I see a musician, it's like what's the point in practicing 6 hours a day,
Mhm.
right? And then you burn your hands out, then you
Yes.
can't play the gig. Like
Yes.
so was is that a little too much, right? It's
Mhm.
like say you don't have just because that's what you did when you were 17
Right.
or you're 22,
Right.
you don't need to keep on doing it that way, right? So people get stuck into loops, and
Yes.
it's real hard to break the loop because you're like you said, well, that's the right way.
Absolutely.
Like
And
what
I
is the right way?
Yes, and I love that term loops, because that's a very it's a word that's very respectful of how the nervous system works. We get in these loops, and how do we break that pattern? And if someone, and I hear a lot, well, I don't have the time. My schedule is very set. My schedule's not my own. But if you don't make the time, your body, your brain, your mind, your mental health, your physical health is going to make you make the time,
It'll crash
right?
out, and then you'll have the time.
Right. And then you'll have more time than you wanted to have, but it's also another challenge. So really learning how to tune in with what you need. And the other thing is, what's sustainable at one phase in your life may be different later. For example, I have a teenager, as I mentioned, and so she's not yet driving. I have a spouse that travels a lot for work. So fitting it in, but through different stages of her life, I'm doing my nervous system regulation. When she was younger, she would join in. And
Mhm.
now it's the big eye roll, like, oh my gosh, that's so not cool. I'm not going to do it. And I don't care, because I still do it. I do it in her presence. And I know that if she is present while I do it, she feels me getting regulated, and then it's easier to co-regulate. So a
Mhm.
lot of times when I had a team that I managed before I changed my business model, we would always start with nervous system regulation at the start of every team meeting. So maybe some of these musicians that are in a group and have a group that they create this amazing gift with of music, or other types of artists, maybe they take one of these tools and share it and say, hey, let's just start with it at the end of every rehearsal, and at the end, or excuse me, the beginning and end of every rehearsal. And then before you perform, like I do a lot of work with performance anxiety and optimizing performance with artists and performers. And you can take 3 minutes or less. And once one of you starts doing it, others are going to feel the shift that you have, and they're going to want to do it too. So it's really easy to kind of just slide it into what you're already doing as a creative and a performer.
Yeah, because it's good to get because a lot of artists, they have their stage self, and you might think that they're overly confident and very, they've got this kind of facade. But if you're actually working with them, like they're agonizing like all day about showing up on stage. And once they're on stage, it seems like they're somebody else.
Yeah.
Like if you actually knew them 15 minutes before, or 2 hours before, or 4 hours before, or 6 hours before, they were like freaking out. And I'm like, and it's like, are you gonna freak out like 90% of the day for 10% of the day you're on stage? Like you gotta change that because eventually that's not a good balance because
Right.
you
And
got to find a way to not. do that.
Yeah, that's a great pathway to burnout. And it's so true. I mean, I love your perspective of 90% of the day for 10%. You're going to deplete yourself so quickly. And you're absolutely right. Some of the most gifted performers, I remember reading something years ago about Barbara Streisand. She had, I mean, I don't know if she still does, but at major points in her career, major performance anxiety, but she got out there and did it anyway.
Yeah.
And so many of the people I work with, whether it's musicians or dancers or speakers who speak, and I love doing speaking and sharing my work. And yeah, I get a bit nervous, and it's not so much about my message. It's about, well, what's going to go on with the tech, or, oh, I hope I don't forget this portion or whatnot. And yet, because I have these tools, I can stay in my joy the days leading up to it, the time
Yeah.
before it that day, and even when I'm there, and it's a lot less depleting than it used to be when I was younger.
Well, I think a lot of times also what I find is like people strive for perfection. And I'm kind of from a modal jazz, fusion jazz mindset, which is like you're in a flow state and you can have a happy accident. There's
Mm,
no bad note. There's an opportunity.
love
So
it.
if you could have a song structure and you could come to it like somebody playing Bach. They got to hit every note that was scored, and they have some room in terms of their expression, but they got to hit those notes in the
Mhm,
patterns that were written on the page. Like if I'm in a fusion group, we have a structure, but we're not wedded to it. If we
mhm.
want to go off, we can go off and we can come back in. Every night it could be different. It'll
I
be
love
slightly
that.
different every night. And so there's nothing wrong about that because you're actually in the moment. You're reading the room, you're reading the band, you're reading the venue, you're reading everything, and then you're applying it like a painter when they finally hit that canvas.
Mm,
Well, that
mhm.
brush stroke, once it hits, that's what it is. Unless you're digital, then you can keep on changing. Then you run into problems. Because
Right.
if you keep on like if you can't commit,
Ooh,
then it
yeah.
causes a lot of anxiety to me. Is
Yeah.
eventually having all the choices ends up making you more frenetic and less satisfied.
Oh my
Versus
goodness.
if
Yes.
you actually hit the paint on a real canvas, once you hit it, that you could blend it, you could try to fix it, but that is what it is. That's what you did. That's what you're gonna work with.
Right. And that's the thing that I think is so amazing. I love the term happy little accidents, like Bob Ross said. And there was an educational program my daughter was in early on where if you were writing or doing some art and you made what you might view as a mistake, you had to incorporate it into what you were doing because it was already on the paper. And just recently, I am a tap dancer and I have this amazing teacher who I love, and she pushes our limits. Well, she's always giving us really unique music. Some of us have never heard of a lot of less known musicians, but she brought in a piece for us to tap to a while back that was not even the way we're used to. And we're all like, oh my gosh.
It's
And
all
she
I know.
wrote it on the dry
Timing
erase
changes.
board.
Timing changes. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were like, oh my goodness. And so I was like, you know what? She just told me where I need to work because I have expectations of how that music's going to show up for me. And I should not be expecting what that musician's going to give me. And
Yeah.
so it really rocked my world. And I was like, okay, this is my home play. I got to go home and work with this and, really understand how to feel this in my body because I'm not a musician yet. One of these days, I want to take drum lessons because I think it's going to help my tap dancing. But I know how to listen to the music. And we were all like, oh my gosh, that class, let's do it again. It was a good challenge.
But I always tell people like even if you're not a musician, like if you're a public speaker and you're giving that TED talk,
Mm-hmm.
if you're actually giving some kind of uh, you're this public speaking, you're doing engagements, you're doing webinars. What your voice is an instrument.
Absolutely.
Words, or if you listen to poetry, it has a meter. Like even when you do spoken word as a presentation, it has a meter. I
Absolutely.
can relate to it as music, and when you start getting to people start to really look at it when they're giving these speeches, they start to understand
Mm-hmm.
that if the words that they don't say, the rhythm or the frequency of how they emphasize things, then they start getting into a little bit of poetry, in
Yeah.
terms of the meter and how you do it. And so even if you're not a singer, like every day you talk, every day
Mhm.
you tell your story, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you can shape that, and you can shape how you speak, and it's an art. So
Oh,
you
yes.
every day a human being, you're art. Everybody's an artist, but they minimize it because they feel, well, I'm not Shakespeare, or I'm
Hmm.
not, Edgar Allan
Yeah.
Poe. I'm not Orson Welles. I'm not this. I'm not that. But you are you.
Yeah. Yes. And you know what that makes me think of, Phantom? I'm so glad you said that. This quote that I'm often sharing, I think it's an old Zimbabwe saying: if you can walk, you can dance. If you can talk, you can sing. Right. And so, again, people really sell themselves short. And I was talking with a woman the other day who wanted to take a tap class. Oh, I haven't done it since I'm 5. I'm like, who cares? Come
Doesn't
on
matter.
in. There's classes for you. There's a class for every level, and you'll find your group. And it's really, I think that humans are made to create sound together and to move together. And that's how we can also create community too.
Yeah, that's why like when you have a forum and people are free to talk, or people are free to like give oral histories, like the whole history of the human. Like I'm part Native American, like the Cherokee, Blackfoot oral histories,
Hmm.
and the chanting and the different things that we do in terms of the traditional tribal talk. It's very musical. It's very kind of in tune, even though it might not appear in some cases. It might be like chanting, or it might
Hmm.
be, but there's a lot of healing in it, and people like your voice in itself has a lot of power. You can create. Musicians can see this immediately. So we can go on stage, and we can get everybody to be waving their hands. We can get everybody to put the candles up, or we could get a bunch of punk rockers to be in the mosh pit.
Yes.
You can trigger behavior, and it's predictable, and you can do it like a comedian. When if he knows he's bombing, he'll change his what he's saying. But musicians, we can do the same thing in real time, and
Sure.
when you use your voice, you can do that in real time.
Absolutely. And I love too what you shared about passing down the spoken word, because that lineage that we're tied to is so important. And that's one of the other things that I love about tap dance, not to take it back to that, but you know, where I dance at Tap Dance Detroit, they have a lot of the elders come in and influence us and teach us.
Yeah,
And
so they know.
we get to we get to learn from them. And I'm so grateful because some of them may not be here for a lot longer. So any moment we have to be in their presence and learn from them, it's huge. It's such a gift. And so I think, yes, we can record things now and whatnot, but let's also be in the presence of people and hear their spoken word, because they're going to say it in a way that no one can write it, you
Yeah,
know?
I think that's really important because people, they're always looking for perfection. They're always looking, then they don't get engaged because like we're living in a social media world. If I don't get 1,000 likes, it's not worth anything. If I don't get
Mhm.
1,000 views, it's not worth anything. And
Mhm.
I'm the type of person who's like throw it at the wall because you don't know
Right.
what's gonna happen because you put it out in the world, you put it out there in the ether, and then your tribe law of attraction they finds you.
Mhm.
But if you never put it out because you're scared, you get a painter, you got everything sitting in a loft, never puts it in the gallery, and people say this is amazing. Like
Mhm.
you end up being like William Blake. Like his all his poetry was sitting in a barn. He's the
Ah,
greatest, one of the greatest poets of the Victorian age. His work was not found until he was gone, right? But he had the presence of mind to etch it into metal. So all the poetry
mm,
is acid met, done into with drawings. All those poems, the songs of
yeah,
innocence and experience, have artwork to go with them on these metal
yeah.
plates. And if you see them, it's like so he couldn't wasn't like successful in his time, but he had the presence of mind and said, "Well, I'm going to make this stuff eternal. I'm going to put it in the metal. And, like maybe somebody will find it." And they did.
How
So
brilliant of
so
them. Yeah.
putting it into the world, you should want to put your voice out in the world. You shouldn't be scared to not to be to not have a permission structure to put it into the world.
Yes, absolutely. I love that.
So like in terms of like your gut health, or the idea that you can regulate yourself with your belly, with your gut. and a lot of people may not understand like what's the connection, and maybe you can start to briefly go through that and maybe expand on it.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'd love to. So, we all hear the phrase, I have a gut feeling, or, it gutted me, or, I just felt like I'd been punched in the gut, so we have a very visceral response to intense things, but many people are going through day-to-day life with gut challenges. And I have personal and professional experience with this. And really my work kind of took me having some pelvic floor training, and then part of my training in the whole visceral manual therapy. I have a training in integrative manual therapy, and the visceral work is basically organ work. And a lot of, it could be definitely working on kidneys and other organs, but I really am drawn to and have a lot of people that seek me out for the hands-on organ work. That's the visceral manual therapy for the GI system, because a lot of people are suffering in silence. And so I like to take it out of the background and bring it to the foreground with ease. I mean, over in my space, I have a stuffed colon we named Colette because she's just kind of an icebreaker. And then I have Embarrassment, the character from Inside Out 2, because sometimes talking about pooping and bodily functions is embarrassing, but it shouldn't be, because it's a beautiful function. And when you are struggling behind the scenes, it's miserable. So I love to teach people simple exercises. I'm not about those powders and potions and, super fancy food. If that works for you, great. But even people that access those are very often missing the basic nervous system regulation pieces and the organ exercises. So for example, if someone's telling me I'm having a lot of cramping, I'm having a lot of bloating, or I'm at one end of the spectrum, either IBS or constipation, or I'm dealing with all this nausea, for example, I'm going to say, let's do some super simple exercises, usually in standing. It's kind of a funky position. You lift one shoulder, you rotate, you move one hip forward, you hold it for 30 seconds to a couple of minutes. And what you're doing is setting that organ up to release, because I can't get all the people in that want to come in and have the manual organ work. And there aren't very many of us around the world doing that. So I want to empower people with tools how to help themselves by doing simple organ releases and nervous system regulation exercises, like reflex movements that are very tied to digestion, that are very tied to the pelvic floor for ease with elimination. And even, I know the vagus nerve is a very hot topic, and it is an important part of nervous system regulation, but it's not the whole picture. But, the vagus nerve starts high in the brain. We call it the wandering cranial nerve because it comes all the way down, passes by the connection of the esophagus and the stomach, and comes down to the pubic bone. So that vagus nerve can get irritated as those organs get kind of cranky and torsioned. And so doing things to release nausea by supporting our vagus nerve, for example. So I'm all about use what you have, which is your own body, find the ease with your gut, connect your brain and your body and gut. And those are just some simple examples of saying, okay, I'm going to do a movement to re-educate my spinal Perez reflex because maybe it got tripped up and therefore I'm not digesting as well. But if I nurture and love up on that particular reflex with maybe some hands-on and some movement, I can find the ease again. I can help my digestion support me instead of hold me back or hinder me.
That's interesting because you're talking about taking, control over things that maybe people thought the only way they can do it is through surgery or medications or other things. They know, diet is important. And, if you're drinking so much caffeine that you're keyed up all the time, you're probably going to get stressed out. But
Mm-hmm.
there are things like what you're talking about, the self-regulation and the different exercises. Because I lived in Japan
Oh,
and
wow.
people were doing Tai Chi, and there's a lot of meditation, a lot of Shintoism that's more like, finding ways to do breathing exercises, meditation, chanting,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that they're actually, go in the middle of the day. Living in Tokyo with all these salarymen, they go out to the park and they were doing Tai Chi, or they were just, chanting or taking walks, or just communing with nature, taking their shoes off and walking on the grass. It's like
Yeah.
different things that you watch people do. It's like, oh, people here that never seem to think, maybe to do that. a different culture, it's like, oh, this is what these guys are doing. And
Yes.
like, wow, it's a different mindset.
I love that you were exposed to that mindset and it stuck with you. I mean, that's powerful. And I am a huge fan of Tai Chi and Qigong. I've studied a bit of both. I would never say I'm an expert in them, but I think the reason I like Qigong maybe a little bit better, although I love them both, than Tai Chi is because it addresses the organs. And so those movements and flows. And, years ago when I really dove into nervous system regulation and wondering why some cultures had longevity that included high function and mobility, including cultures like you're describing, where Tai Chi was done in the parks and Qigong. If you look at the movements in those art forms, and they're really considered martial arts, when you
Mhm.
look at those, there's a lot of crossing the midline.
Yeah.
And as we age, we become very one planar and we lose that ability. And if we start to lose rotation, it's going to affect our cognitive abilities, believe it or not, because
Mhm.
that's tied into some of those developmental patterns that help us keep our cognition. So, a lot of times people will ask me what's something I could do that isn't super demanding because maybe they have some bone density issues or whatnot. And I always say walking and Tai Chi or Qigong, because the Qigong and the Tai Chi, again, crossing that midline, very grounding. What you were talking about, taking your shoes off, getting in connection with the earth. It's called earthing. And we need more of it. And it's very nourishing to our systems. And in some cultures, or some areas where I live, it's freezing cold. I'm not going to walk
Yeah,
out there,
yeah, 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 yeah.
right? But in some areas, as soon as the weather changes, I'm going to get my socks and shoes off. But in some areas, you can do it more year round. And
Mhm.
even just going out with my sneakers on and standing and watching that sun come up to help reset my circadian rhythm. And then as the sun is going down, standing out there and feeling the transition in my body, that is a huge signal to my body that I need to transition to that nighttime presence, for example. So yeah, I love that you had that exposure and that it stuck with you. It made an impression, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I really love about Tokyo. I was there for 2 years. I still always wanted to go back, but the other thing I find is I live in New Hampshire and we got these tall pines. And I'm a mountain biker and I like snowshoe and hike, and I find it's very because my day job I'm in IT, and
Mhm.
IT people tend to measure themselves by like how long they sit in the cube, and I
Oh,
actually don't. I have a stand up desk, so I spend a lot of time just standing up and using my treadmill type of thing that I've got set up. Can I kind of learn from like a lot of the Google, like some of the higher end IT shops, they actually figured out that sitting in the cube actually wasn't that great. So
right.
they started to have like the stand up desk, and then
Oh,
hey, you could go play pool during the day, or you could go walk
yes.
over here, or even have a little treadmill at your desk, or you could go to the gym, come back. They were more flexible about like you don't need to be in the cube if you're actually productive. It doesn't matter as
Right.
long as you get the work done.
Well,
Where
and
people were measuring like how long you stay in the cube.
yeah, it's sort of that badge of busyness, right? That people are always looking for, oh, I'm super busy or I'm this productive. But really, are you truly productive in a way that allows for your greatest creativity, for your greatest focus to come through? And so really, that's great that you have the treadmill desk, the stand-up desk. I love those. I do a lot of sitting on the floor and working on my computer because crisscross applesauce becomes difficult as we celebrate more birthdays. And I want my crisscross applesauce to stay there because I like to be
Mhm.
able to sit on the floor, and there's measures of longevity getting up and off the floor. But definitely, because you are in IT, and it's what a gift that you have that balance with the creative side and the musical talents and the IT talents. But for people that are on screens for long periods of time, they often ask me, what can I do for my nervous system? And I love that they're asking that, because that two-dimensional experience, which usually goes hours on end, for weeks on end, for years on end, that two-dimensional experience can stress out our nervous system big time. So
Mhm.
we can get in an eye lock for the devices forward, or if we're in a stress state where the saber-toothed tiger came and we get into the periphery lock, and then even after the saber-toothed tiger moves on, but we're still stuck there or stuck on our forward screen, the best thing to do is push away from your screen, look away, and just start scanning your eyes side to side, up and down, diagonals, and circles. And even better, do it looking out the window so you can see three-dimensional things, because we really have to remember that the eyes are a huge part of the nervous system. and we need to support them. So all of you in the IT world, my hope for you is to have opportunities to move your eyes in more three-dimensional ways to balance out all the two-dimensional work that you do.
Yeah, a lot of times like you really need to give yourself like, a break like every hour. And the bosses don't probably want to hear it, but it's like a lot of times like you could be super productive and get everything done in like 2 hours out of an 8 hour day. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I've run into people like if we've been doing it 25 years, it doesn't take the full 8 hours to do it. Right. And so if I can actually produce, then you can actually go and take a walk during the middle of the day. Right. You could go to the gym. You could go on
Yeah.
your rowing machine. You could go like take a walk around the block and then come back if
Yes.
you had a stressful meeting. Right.
Exactly. Or even
Instead of going to smoke or drink some more latte, go for a walk.
yes, or take that meeting on a walk.
Yeah,
When I had
with
a
the
team that I
Bluetooth.
was managing, yeah, take that meeting, or even if it's with people in person, I've done that when I need to meet with a colleague. Let's take it outside and just go for a walk because we both were longing for some time. I'm always talking about the nature deficit that we have, and we need to get out there. But I also want to acknowledge what you said about maybe the supervisors don't love it. But I'll tell you, I've been called into corporations to talk about stress management and productivity. And they'll always say to me, well, we don't want to call the presentation stress management because they feel like they're going to feed into the stress. And I'm like, I don't want to call it stress management either because we don't want to put out there what we want more of. We want to talk about peaceful productivity. And that's what you want. And if you can give them tools to be peacefully productive, you're going to have more longevity, you're going to have better productivity, you're going to have better morale. It's going to be amazing for anyone in your corporate setting or even smaller business settings.
'Cause a lot of times, if you have neurodivergent people, tend to be very creative,
Yeah.
and sometimes they don't fit within the bell curve. They
Mhm.
produce like my daughter is an artist, and a lot of times she produces work, late at night. She gets ideas.
Mhm.
She's an artist, and she works late at night, and then she'll, like a typical like a lot of musicians will run to the same thing. Like they will do a session, 12 to 3 a.m. And
Mhm.
then they're sleeping in when everybody else is working. But that's way they're kind of neurodivergent, right? They
Yeah.
actually they actually get the idea, but it's not on your clock. It's like it's on a different clock. And it's like, well, if they get it done, does it matter, right?
Right.
When they
Right.
got it done, and so their companies are starting to realize like, hey, this person actually can get it done, but they're not doing the 9 to 5. They're doing it in this different time frame, but they still got it in on time. So are
Absolutely.
you going to penalize them because they didn't fit in the median of the bell curve? They're not in the middle. And
Mhm.
a lot of times they say they want the people on the outer edges. They want those creative people, but then they want to put them in a box.
Yeah. That's so hard. And I'm very passionate. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm very passionate about really honoring the way that we're wired. Neurodivergence. I know I talked about my hyper focus. I have ADHD. And so I get into hyper focus mode and can just write and write and create. And so the whole idea is that we need to honor the way people are wired. And I think if we can start that at a younger stage and help people grow up with feeling empowered with however they're wired, then we're going to have a future where settings aren't going to put those people in those boxes. They're going to say, we value your brilliance and we want that brilliance and we want to honor the way that you can best bring that brilliance forward. So I do love the different settings that are more accepting and welcoming of different levels of, attention and focus and that neurodivergence piece.
Yeah, but like a non-traditional workplace. I work virtually, and a lot of times I have to adjust to time zones because we're working with people offshore. So,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm working with somebody in Japan, I might have to do a meeting at 6 a.m. or 7 at night or
Mm-hmm.
9 o'clock at night. Or so sometimes it's like, well, if I'm working that time, I was like, I can actually go for a mountain bike ride at like 9 in the morning because that's not when I need to be on. I was on at 6.
Yeah.
So when you get into these non-traditional type of structures that allow it to, based on did you actually get the task done?
Right.
You know, did you actually get the work done? Did you meet
Exactly.
your goals?
Yes.
instead of being measured on something else. And like they is like it's wired the way you're wired. And sometimes you have to find the environment that suits like your frequency, like where you are. And a lot of times people are like, well, do I deserve to do that? Do I have the permission to do that? Well, you have to give yourself the permission to do that.
Yeah, so true. And that's a really good point that you hit on, Phantom, because a lot of people don't feel worthy. And that's sad because maybe growing up, their style, the way they were wired, wasn't respected, it wasn't honored. I mean, you hear even these horrible stories about people who were naturally left-handed and they were taught to be right-handed.
Yeah,
Well,
they're
that's
forced
a
to.
message of growth, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's like
I mean, my hope is really that we can create it earlier for people. And then those of us that are adults that maybe have that history, even maybe some trauma around that we can learn to heal around that and give ourselves permission to honor our style and the way that we feel best and move through life best and create best, right?
yeah, I think because a lot of times I've kind of geared away from Fortune 500 to maybe smaller entrepreneurial enterprises. That's why I like to be. Because what I find is like in sometimes in some places I've been able to wear multiple hats where I could do like whatever was needed, like a startup mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And a startup is like if I can do architecture, well, one day I might be doing that. Next day I might be doing QA. Next day I might be doing analytical work,
Mm-hmm.
or I might be doing work on a charter or an SOW, or working on a project plan, working like a manager. But the next day I'm an analyst. Next day I
Mm-hmm.
could be doing some coding, because it's like everybody has a lot of different skill sets, and sometimes in certain situations you can ramp up. But people tend to think it's like they tend to think one dimensional. They
Yes.
don't look at all the different hats
Yes.
that
And
people have, and then people get punished for certain hats and not punished for other ones.
right. Well, and you're multi-talented and multi-passionate, and we need more people like that. Years ago, I went to a lecture. It was a parenting lecture for early development, and they said, we don't need more kids that can take information and spit it back out to you. We need to create critical, creative thinkers.
Thinkers.
That's what we need for the future. And so I'm pretty passionate about that with my daughter, finding educational environments and communities that allow her to learn to think and to question things, because we need people that are going to solve some pretty big problems here in the future, and they have to be able to think differently and critically.
But you have to be able to have the ability to learn. Like part of like in IT, we've moved from mainframes to AI and
Mm,
everywhere in between, right? And
yes.
and I have some capabilities on old mainframes, and they're still around, right? But I
Wow.
have some capabilities on AI that I've learned in blockchain. Say the one thing we learn in IT is it's exponential, the growth of the tech. And
Mm,
whatever was big a year ago, 6 months ago, is not always big the next month. And it
right.
might be in the next arena, there's a totally different like foundation.
Hmm.
Okay, so the foundational structures, like the canon, keeps on shifting. It's not like it's
Mm,
like, oh, it's like Shakespeare. It's like, no, it's something else, right? It's
hmm.
the whole foundational structure is based on something else, right?
Yeah.
And so you're like, you have to be a student. And the one thing I love about, I went to a liberal arts school, Bowdoin College. They taught me how to learn. They
Yes. Oh
taught
my
me
goodness.
how to know what I didn't know
Yep.
and seek out the knowledge and be able to cite it and understand it, and for blue book exam rather than multiple choice oral
Right.
exam, where you have
Yes.
to tell your professor in your own words, make your case like a lawyer, right? But you could be in philosophy class and make your case about how you understood Camus or Sartre. You had
Mhm.
to explain. It wasn't just a multiple choice of what does Sartre says for this, and you take A, B, C, D. No, you had to tell the professor, what did he mean by this.
Yes.
What did they mean by the overman? What do they mean? How can you give an example what this concept means in your own words and explain it?
Yes, I am also a product of a liberal arts education and a huge fan. I think it really taught me how to think critically, think differently, be a problem solver, and just more well-rounded. And so I'm a huge fan
Yeah,
of that. It's awesome.
yeah. Because I think people focus. I know there's a lot of focus on just learning math, which like I'm into math, but like you have to understand context. You
Hmm.
you should understand some history.
Yes.
You should understand cultural understandings, and not think it's foo-foo, right?
Mhm.
So, so the softer things, and people say, "Oh, I don't need to know art. I don't need to know art history. There's no value in that because I can't go make money on the stock market." It's like there's certain things that I think make up like a human being, like pillars.
Mhm.
And I think the arts, no matter what the art is a big pillar of humanity. Right? It makes things worth getting into. Like you talk about dance, you talk about the things you seem so passionate about it. That makes things worthwhile. It's not just like the number, right, on a spreadsheet, but what's the value of it, right? The spreadsheet might give you the number, but it doesn't give you the value.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a really brilliant observation. So true. I love that.
So it's like it's opening up to like understand the value of your own peace of mind, right? And the
Mhm.
connection, like you're saying about the pillars. Like that is something some people might that's foo foo. They can't get it because like it doesn't make that's not what they want to hear because they get these paradigms and they're like locked into it.
Mhm.
And so the idea there's a connection to your brain, your body, and your belly, and your heart, and your soul, and the ether, and all. It's like, whoa, no, that's too foo foo. Do you run into people that have a hard time where they just want like, well, just give me this one thing,
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
want the one quick fix, one thing, magic bullet.
Yeah, I do find people like that. And I kind of want to piggyback on something you said about, you know, they're they're very linear, and sometimes people want that one track, one direction. And what I find it makes me think about how a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm right brain or I'm left brain. I'm creative, so I'm right brain. I'm very linear, I'm very numerical, so I'm left brain." And you and I tell people, and this is coming as a brain gym practitioner, is you're not right brain, you're not left brain. Actually, at your best, at your optimum, you're right and left brain integrated. But what happens is under stress, we adopt a style. I know in my younger years under stress, I would get very linear, make all these lists, very follow what's my protocol to follow. And
Mhm.
but underneath it, I was super creative. And so it always felt wrong. It always felt disingenuous. So then when I really learned how to integrate, move out of that stress survival mode into the right and left brain integration, then I knew that I was really at my optimum place. But for those people that struggle with that, I just gently meet them where they're at. I don't want to push them too far because they have to feel safe.
Yeah,
You
safety
know,
is a big thing because the fear
safety.
and safety, that's like that wolf at the door. You're saying, like,
Exactly, exactly. And so the number one thing we start with is helping people feel safe. And for one person, that might be maybe they had a previous injury in their back, their low back, or their shoulder, and they're afraid to try a new movement from a therapeutic approach because that in the past triggered them. So then, before we try any corrective or therapeutic exercise, we're going to integrate their nervous system to find safety. And we might work with, for example, the fear paralysis reflex to get them out of that state of fear that has become a pattern for them. Or maybe for someone else, I work with a lovely woman who she has a little bit of concern about germs. And I think a lot of people got there after COVID, but there's a mat, and even though we wipe down the mat when she's in first session, I know it still doesn't make her comfortable. So I take a fresh towel and I put it over the mat. It's so easy to do, and it helps her feel comfortable and safe in this space. Then we can get to the work at hand. So for those people that want a quick fix, I would try to encourage them to be curious about how maybe it's not one track and a quick fix, but what I would do is meet them where they're at and help them find their safety point. And a really easy place for your lovely audience to find a safety point is the midline. So finding the midline of your body and just putting one hand at the top where the breastbone and the collarbone come together, and then putting another hand, the second hand underneath it, and just working your way down very gently down the midline of the body until you get to the end of the trunk, and then coming back up. You're just getting yourself back into your body, but most importantly at that midline, and then start some cross body movement. So that person that is stuck in left brain or even stuck in right brain, really when they need to be both, if they can do some cross body movements, like a simple cross crawl that you could do seated or standing, just reaching to the opposite side, that's going to help get you out of that place that might be fear-based and less productive. Or I
I
should
think
sorry, I
that,
should
that's awesome. I mean, I think the integration of actual body movement with like a presence of mind to understand what it's doing internally. And I think it's like when people start like you got to get to somebody's like comfort zone,
mm-hmm.
and that you like you say you got to know where they are.
Exactly.
And then like it's like any teacher, like you figure out like where's my student as a producer, like how good is this guy on the bass? Like, and I want him to get to here. Right? I want him to get like
Mm-hmm.
way here, but he's here. He's not there. He's here. So for this song, he's got to ramp up. Right? So, but you can't put all that on him in one session.
Oh, right.
Right?
Absolutely.
You got to kind of ease them into it and let them have some wins. Like I've run into people like, well, if you go and you tear the guy down, it's like then he's gonna think he can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be the teacher that tells them like makes them believe that they can do it instead
Absolutely.
of the one that says, well, I don't think I'll ever get there. So it's like right from the start, they're already psyching themselves out.
Right.
So you
Well,
want to make them feel like that it is possible. It's hard. It might be a hard road to go, but it's
yeah.
not impossible to go.
Well, and what you said about tearing them down, coming from the dance world, the old school style was tear them down and then build them up. But really, that is setting up nervous system dysregulation. And then they're going to have years of healing to come through that trauma. And it's like that in various endeavors that people embark on early in life, even later in life. So, what if we set them up with those foundational pieces, like you're talking about, that are honoring their nervous system? Like, I have a lot of educators in the arts come to me and ask for tools to support them in supporting their students. And
Mhm.
especially because a lot of adults want to pick up their instruments again, or their musical love again later in life, or dance, or whatever it might be. What if we could give them a few quick, simple tools to empower their nervous system, and then they're learning from a place of ease instead of a place of stress?
Yeah,
That would be
this
the vision.
anxiety monster. Like if they have this anxiety monster, in order to play a good run on any instrument, from a guitar to a clarinet to a violin, is that your fingers can't be like all. You gotta be limber. Like you gotta be able to have the movement that's like a flow.
Mhm.
If you're too agitated or anxious, you're gonna kind of haphazard. You're not gonna get into the flow state. You're not gonna feel like it becomes like it has to become something that's kind of like flow like water, which is like what does that mean? But like if you're flowing like a I don't know angry creek because of a flood,
Yes.
it's not going to really work.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love that whole flow state. I mean, there's whole books written on the flow state, and really that's what we're seeking, is that optimization of our nervous system, so that even if we're learning something challenging, we can learn with joy and ease and not from a place of stress. So absolutely.
Yeah, when you're shown something like this is how a master did it, and this is how you can get to it without thinking that you can't be the master. But you start to break it down.
Hmm.
And really good teachers like will break something down into part accessible, you know, a part that you can actually bite this off. You can actually do it.
Right.
You can get it there piece at a time.
Yes.
Remember when I was learning my clarinet, we were learning how to trill. And it was like trying to figure out how to get that trill and my tongue in the right position on the mouthpiece. It wasn't something you got right away, but I had a teacher that kind of eased us into pieces of it.
Love
Right,
it.
trying to make us do the whole thing all at once versus like there are teachers that try to make you do the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
There's no way. It's like, well, are you really going to be able to do that? Maybe one kid out of 100 is going to do it right.
Ah,
Versus like, do you want the whole class to be able to succeed, or you want that
right.
one kid to succeed?
Well, and think about how many people had their dreams crushed because they felt like they weren't that one in 100, and And I want, yeah, I love that your teacher taught it to you in that way and gave you the opportunity to feel empowered and successful. That's what we want.
Yeah, it's math is so complicated, but if you break it down, you make it fun.
Yeah.
I had a teacher that kind of back in I'm a child of the '70s, and they taught us in terms of like understanding like the physics in a Space Invaders game,
Ooh,
right?
fun.
So it was like 1978, 79, and like it seems all theoretical, right? When you're looking at it, it's like, well, what does that really? What does this formula really do? But when you show like, well, this is what happens when this dot hits this video game object and then it has to bounce off like it hit it. This is how this formula can be real life and it actually means something to you as a kid.
Yeah. So there we are back at meeting you where you were at, right?
Yeah.
And that meeting you where you were at, not trying to make it some grandiose college level or graduate school level math, but bring it to where you kids were living at that time with the I
Yeah.
remember Space Invaders. That was a fun one.
Yeah. But it's
So,
like if you actually get the kid to see like, oh, if I learn this, I actually can apply that to like an Atari game,
uh-huh.
which maybe
Yeah.
I could go be a programmer.
Right. And look at you. You
And
did that. You became IT expert, right?
yeah, because you can see like there's art in it.
Mm-hmm.
You started to see where math actually can become art.
Ah, love
And
it.
then you're like, oh, it actually can help like movement of this character. And they actually, the polygons are geometric shapes. And if you put them together in these patterns, you can actually make art. And you're
Wow.
like, oh, so that's how geometry works. That's how I could use these geometric formulas to do polygons and do this and do that. And you start to understand, it's like, oh, it's not beyond me. It's actually something I like, right? That I can understand, I can relate to it. And that's where I think the greatest teachers are people who are trainers, make people feel that that they're being spoken to and they're being understood, and they actually going to be let in the club.
Yes. Well,
It's not
how
a club that
fortunate.
can't be in the club. You can't be in the club.
Yeah. How fortunate that you had, it sounds like a handful of really fantastic teachers. I mean, that's a rare gift right there. And now you're passing it along with the way you spread the word and inspire others. I love that.
Well, I think inspiredwell.com is like inspiration is like everything. Like into like what you're saying with the way you're doing it with the inner peace and regulation is like in the arts. A lot of us artists, we do what we do because it's very cathartic.
Yes.
It helps us find peace and we work through whatever frustrations or pain or feelings we have, and we figured out how to use art as a tool to do that. And
Absolutely.
you're teaching people how to use movement to regulate their body and their mind and their spirit, and like and understand you have control. And I think, and that's the same control that the permission structure allows you. It's like to be an artist is like you have to believe that you can actually do it.
Right. You have to envision yourself as if your goal has already happened, right? And by moving towards it, it's a metaphor, movement of nervous system regulation is truly a metaphor to moving towards what it is that you're desiring. Whether it's a new musical piece, a new skill, or inner peace.
Yeah, and even like entrepreneurs, they need to be able to have their vision enabled, but then they might have a very stressful time doing that because they got to get funding. They own it, they break it, they own it, right? It's theirs. So it's like I can't blame somebody else. It's like you, right? So that's a lot of stress on you. It's like how do you keep yourself from burning out?
Mm-hmm.
You need to find a way, the healthy way to not burn out,
Yes.
and a way that's sustainable. Like we said before, is like
Mm-hmm.
sustainable because there's a lot of stuff out there that might give you the quick fix and it's not sustainable.
Yes, absolutely.
And what you're teaching with what I can hear from what we've talked about is sustainable practices that you're going to be able to keep on doing and keep on growing and really, you know, give yourself the due and respect that yourself do. A lot of people say, well, they don't love themselves, but you do have to put time into yourself before you can love anybody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So if people go to your inspiredwell.com and /inner peace,
Mhm.
what would they find there? What happens if they click on that URL?
Yeah, sure. So that is a quick introduction to some of these very simple nervous system regulation tools. These are more hands on, not a lot of movement, because I want people to be able to push away from their desk and do a gentle tapping exercise for the fear paralysis reflex. And just start to, again, starting at that one piece, because if we all could start to move beyond fear and anxiety, imagine what would be possible for ourselves, but also for our communities and our families. So it's three very short videos that are less than 3 minutes and really just get you started and give you a small taste, an appetizer, if you will, of the work. And then I also every week in my Facebook community share a brain body biome inspo live where I take a topic that maybe people have been asking about or one that I feel people could really benefit from. And I just give a 10 to 15-minute introduction to it. And there's always at least one tool that I share that they can take and then start to use, very similar to what's in the Inner Peace program that I'm so happy to share with everyone.
That's awesome. I love live demonstrations or live events because I feel that it feels authentic, gets people feeling that I think you get a lot of buy-in
Yes.
versus like something that's kind of not staged, but like if something's um too tight or
Yes.
kind of like infomercial like
Yes. Right.
people don't feel it's like is authentic or doesn't speak to them. And like that's why the podcast format is so big today because
Yes.
people they have this form and they're like, oh, it's an open discussion.
Right.
It's this oral history that we're doing in
Yeah.
real time.
And you
And
can work on things and and that I love the idea of the lives too, because as a recovering perfectionist, I really had to learn to go, oh, if the other day I dropped my microphone in a mug of water and I was like, okay, there goes my microphone, but we're going to keep on going. I just unplugged it, put another little ditty in, and
yeah,
away we went. But just showing people real life, because none of us are perfect, all of us are growing and learning. And so if I'm on a live and something happens, or one time I was demonstrating a live recently and it was an exercise that included balance and I kind of lost my balance and I was like, oh yeah, I'm working on my balance right now too, just in case you thought I had completed my balance work. I have not.
yeah.
So,
I think it's like why people go to see any kind of live event is they don't want to see it that's totally what they could have seen on film.
right.
They go to see a play like in New York, like off Broadway, because they want to see how that actor is going to run that line or how they're going to carry that note or how the dancer is going to do
Yes.
that move. Is like that's like the event in itself is I think people have always been drawn to, hey, that's happening right now. That's
Right.
happening in front of me right now. There's no special effects, there's no tricks.
Right.
That's like is what it is. And I think that people are always going to want that. So I
Yeah.
want to thank you for being on the show tonight. It's always, we always hit the hour mark faster than we ever imagined. But I want
Sure.
to thank you for being on the show.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. What a fun conversation that went to a lot of areas that I think are really important, but also areas that I don't always get to talk about. So I really appreciate that, Phantom. I really appreciate what you're putting out there and how you're supporting the world right now. Thank you.
But thank you. And like I said, this will be out in the world. We've been live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You have those links; they're immediately available to your audience, and we'll put together a landing page for everybody to check out whatever platform they want to. It'll
Yes.
be on that by tomorrow. And I want to thank you again for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. Have a great
Thank you
night.
so much for having me. You too.